So that we get ourselves moving, let me start by once again welcoming you to today's webinar that is focusing on translational bioethics and public health. And so when we look at the area of translational bioethics and public health, we're actually focusing on an interdisciplinary field that explores the ethical, social, and legal implications of applying scientific advancements in biomedicine to public health. So this is a field that delves into complex issues that arise when new technologies, new interventions, and policies are introduced into our healthcare systems. And there are so many issues that we need to look into, including issues around equitable access to healthcare, issues around consent, privacy concerns, and also lots of other unintended, consequences. So we are happy today that we have two panelists that have agreed to share with us their views on this very, very interesting topic. So the way we are going to proceed is we are going to have our panelists, giving their talks, and after that, we are going to have a question and answer segment. So for our question and answer segment, please feel free to use the Q&A facility that is within this application. So at the bottom there, you see somewhere it says Q&A. Please feel free to type in your questions. We can also use the chat function to just write a bit about ourselves and also even our questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, who is Professor Mark Rothstein, who is the Director of Translational Bioethics at the Institute of Clinical and Translational Science at the University of California, Irvine. So Professor Rothstein has concentrated his recent research on genetics, health privacy, international health research, public health, and translational bioethics. And he has served as the president of the American Society of Law, Medicine, and Ethics. And from 1999 to 2008, he served as the chair of the Subcommittee on Privacy and Confidentiality of the National Committee on Vital and Health Statistics. And from 2011 to 2019, he was the associate editor for Public Health Ethics, Law and Law of the American Journal of Public Health. He has written widely on various issues. So he has actually written one of the articles that we have shared to all of you. So now I'm going to hand over to Mark so that he can give his talk.
Thank you very much. I'm waiting to see if my slides appear that I can see them.
Okay.
I've often said I could do this talk in my sleep, and I may have to. So when the slides come up, I will begin. Oh, that looks familiar. And someone is going to be advancing them because I have no control. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me and for putting this webinar together. And to those who are tuning in, I'm sorry that we've had this technical problem, but I think that maybe we can make up for it with a stimulating program nonetheless. And as you can see from my title, Director of Translational Bioethics, this subject is something that I'm quite invested in and have spent a great deal of time working on, and I'd like to share with you my views on this. To begin with, let me say that for those of us working in public health, we know that the issue of public health ethics and policy deal constantly with balancing individual and societal interests. We have that same situation in research ethics, where we have individual and societal interests. Traditionally, research ethics has focused on individuals, and there's a good reason for that, because the whole field started because of these abuses that everyone is well aware of. But modern biomedical research, such as we see on the next slide, brings these very complex and important issues to the fore. And it's not a good idea, in my view, to have a restricted view of what research ethics is all about. And that's why I think translational bioethics, by tackling these societal issues, makes an important contribution. Next slide, please. So as I suggested, the goal of translational bioethics is to expand the focus of research ethics, not to displace the individual, but to supplement our concerns about the individual in research ethics. Next, please. There are three related concepts that I want to go through for you. Many of the people watching this webinar are familiar with translational research, but it is, in fact, the use of innovative technologies to try to expedite development in the field. And there are many examples you could think of. One might be the cancer moonshot at NIH. Another one would be all the research that's funded by the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, NCATS, at NIH as well. Next, please. Then we have translational science, which is the systematic study of translational research, or one way of thinking about it is the research about research, to try to improve these techniques. Yes, next please. And then we have translational bioethics, which deals closely with translational research and translational science, and attempts to focus on and analyze the societal and long-term implications. Translational bioethics is more than what we have traditionally thought of as bioethics. It involves humanities, social sciences, public health, and all these other disciplines weighing in to try to figure out what are these important societal and long-term implications of biomedical research. Next, please. An interesting challenge for the field is that there is a conflict between the idea of translational bioethics and the limitations that have been put on it by the federal research regulations, or the common rule. And there's a provision on the screen of the federal research regulations that say that IRBs should not consider possible long-range effects, and should not consider them as research risks that fall within its responsibility. That has been a very difficult provision to interpret. And on the next slide, we've got 4 of the possible interpretations. So one of the reasons that this is in place is to avoid having systemic issues such as equitable access to healthcare being placed on the agenda of IRBs when they don't have membership that includes, for example, health economists ordinarily, or medical sociologists or anthropologists, all these other fields that you might need to consult with. And if we did have that on an IRB agenda, the concern is that it would first overburden the IRBs, which struggle to keep up and keep, evaluating protocols on a timely basis, and also overburden researchers, because if IRBs are going to consider that, they need to address that in their grant applications, and that's not the expertise of most of the scientists who submit grants for approval. The negative determination, which is the way the regulation is currently written arguably could impede scientific progress. If we're worried about what could happen down the road, well, then we're not going to proceed now, and that would be a bad thing according to traditional thinking. On the other hand, you could construe this regulation as saying that positive effects, such as we're now going to cure cancer, should not outweigh the individual interests that we've come to know since the Nuremberg Code and all the other documents in between. Next, please. So as I envision translational bioethics, I think the perfect place for it to reside, at least at the outset, is in the 60 NIH-funded clinical and translational science awardees. These are the best of the best in terms of the institutions that perform innovative scientific research. They have the resources both within the CTSA and in the larger institution to address these kinds of issues. And I think the way that CTSAs work now in terms of research, they do need to consider traditional research criteria like informed consent and balancing of risks and benefits, et cetera. I think this is a missed opportunity. And my hope is that over time, either through NCATS directives or through just a general appreciation of the importance of these issues, that CTSAs will increasingly address translational bioethics. Next, please. And in the American Journal of Public Health article that I think some of you may have read, I set out 4 elements for translational bioethics. The first one being that it's integrated with the research so that bioethics researchers from multidisciplines are actually embedded with the researchers, and there is a great deal of give and take and value added by that arrangement. Second, that it be timely. One of the problems that we have in evaluating innovative research is we often in the bioethics world don't know about it until the research is published or there's a press conference or something. But if the researchers are working jointly with bioethics scholars, now we've got a jump head start on that. Third, it's interdisciplinary and collaborative, using all these other disciplines, which will vary, of course, depending on the nature of the research. And then finally, it's internally and externally oriented. By this, I mean that part of the work that's done is perhaps by the ethics advisors or consultants making suggestions that might actually improve the methodology of the research. And then on the other end, once the research is completed, addressing the public policy issues that may be raised by the research. Next, please. And on this slide are some criteria for assessing possible societal effects. I just want to highlight 2 of them. Health equity would take up issues such as, isn't this CRISPR gene therapy for sickle cell disease amazing? But it's going to cost $2 to $3 million per case, and we have 100,000 people with sickle cell disease in the United States. How are we going to figure out who's going to get access to this? And then in terms of public acceptability, does the public want what the research is doing? What are the obstacles to wider acceptability? Next, please. And that thought brings us to the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, which got my thinking sort of jet started on this issue. Suppose we came up with revolutionary vaccine platforms that would eventually save 3 million lives in the United States, and a substantial minority of the population doesn't want to take it. And these technologies were in development for over a decade, and I'm not saying it was the responsibility of the researchers to anticipate and address these issues concurrently with their scientific research, but I think maybe somebody, some entity ought to have been involved in that. Next, please. And next slide. Thank you. And of course, what we saw was this widespread opposition, much of it based on the idea that it was violating the freedom of the individuals to mandate this or even to, strongly recommend it, and they didn't want to take that. And if you think about public health in general, here we are back to the issue of individual versus group rights and interests. And these are the kinds of things that needed to be addressed. We saw in the United States a growing anti-vaccine movement, including in 2009, when we had the H1N1 pandemic, and many people refused to get the vaccine that was available at that time. Next, please. So the results, I think we're well aware of. They were not good. Only about 70% of adults received the vaccine in the United States, which was much lower than our peer countries. And as a result, we had many more unvaccinated Americans die. And this was totally unnecessary. And we still see that trend continuing with people who actually get COVID refusing to accept treatment for Paxlovid in the first week of their symptoms, and that has led to at least 48,000 deaths. Next, please. So I want to leave you with this bigger question that translational bioethics poses. Do scientists have a moral obligation to consider the societal consequences of their research? And I would add to that, what about the sponsors of the research? What about the institutions that employ the researchers? What about the commercial entities that often partner with the research? What are their obligations? Next, please. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that I've used for many years in my research ethics classes. And recently, I haven't had to explain who Oppenheimer is anymore, and the dilemma that he was facing. But the quote that you can see on the screen captures, I think, some of the traditional views of scientists, that we go ahead and do our science and let other people worry about it after the fact. Oppenheimer greatly regretted this view from 1945 until his death in 1967. And I'm not suggesting that every scientist has the kind of moral dilemma that Oppenheimer faced. But there are many important issues that really need attention. And if it's not the scientist, who ought to do it? And what I've suggested through my writing on translational bioethics is that it ought to be built into the sort of the framework of researchers who are doing this cutting edge translational research. So thank you for asking me to speak, and I look forward to your questions later on.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark, for such a great talk. We have basically laid down a very, very good foundation for this webinar. You basically explained to us some of the limitations that relate to the current way we actually are reviewing research at the moment, particularly using our institutional review board or research ethics committees. And you also even mentioned the issue of the federal regulations and explained why there is that clause within the federal regulations that IRBs should not look into those issues that relate to the future and also that relate to society in general. But you clearly linked all this to the history in terms of how our research oversight has developed. So more importantly, you're actually trying to drive us in the direction of focusing on the implications to society. And yes, of course, whilst we still consider the individuals, we actually need also to focus on the implications to society, because those individuals are in any case a part of society. So thank you very much for laying that foundation, and also for raising some questions that we hope we'll try and look into. So now I'm going to introduce our second panelist. I'm happy to introduce one of our own, Dr. Samar, who is a professor in the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership here at the George Washington University, where she also serves as the section chief of translational research. So I think she's going to add on to what Mark provided, because basically now we're actually looking at that very, very close link between the translational research and looking into the societal implications. She is also an academic program director of the PhD in Translational Health Sciences and co-director of the MD program in Clinical Research Practice. She's also program director of both the Master of Science in Health Sciences in Clinical and Translational Research and the Bachelor of Science in Clinical Health Sciences. She has served as a PI and co-investigator on about 12 clinical trials, and also serves as an instructor in clinical and translational research and clinical trial investigations within our School of Medicine and Health Sciences. She has authored numerous journal articles and book chapters focusing on cardiovascular diseases and hypertension and ethnic disparities. I'm going now to hand over to Dr. Nasser to give us views.
Hello, thank you so much. It's very nice to meet you, and thank you everyone for being here and hosting me today. And that was a really great talk, Dr. Rothstein. So I'm hoping just to add on from a clinician and a clinical researcher perspective who's been in the CTSI world. Just a couple of notes on this slide. You'll see that bioethics research practice need to be aligned. I believe that it should be for effective real world impact and thinking long term as well from the public health perspective. We need collaborative approaches for enabling this collaboration for translational bioethics. And that way we can actually pave the road for genuine interdisciplinary collaboration. And it's critical right now, especially given the social injustices we have today. So I want to kind of just take a little overview, a step back on where translational bioethics fits in the translational continuum and how it impacts patients and population outcomes. And that's where the next slide will come in. Next slide, please. So here, I really like this view because I believe it was Linda Frith, she posted this, and it's about ethics translation pipeline, which is aligned to the CTSI translational pipeline based on the biomedical sciences. So the trajectory from bench to bedside, which we always hear about. So this is kind of from the bioethics standpoint. Although it's not perfectly aligned, it is a useful way of conceptualizing different forms of bioethics research in the translational movement as it continues on into practice. So if you know on the far left of the pipeline, you have research in philosophy. And this is which considers your foundational issues. This is purely theoretical driven. Over to the far right, you'll see the translational bioethics in orange. This actually aims to improve practice. So most of bioethic research, what I've noticed, it kind of lies in between these points, which is theoretical based and then practically focused bioethics. If you focus in on the center in the light green, that's where the practical bioethical research, she posts that right in there in the center. And it's more attentive to solving practical problems while considering practical restraints of the world. So the aim of the practically focused bioethics is to advance debates, like currently, over real world problems and potentially influence our practice. So much of the outcomes of the practically focused bioethics, it comprises dissemination, such as journal articles, books, research grants, teaching. So if you go to the dark green, you'll see a smaller bubble and it says empirical bioethics. This lies the most recent form of practically focused bioethics from her pipeline here. And it takes engagement with the real world problems one step further by conducting the empirical research that is needed to understand the contextual nature about the ethical issues. So even though some bioethics engage in outreach activities, the practical influence is still more based on disseminating findings to relevant actors than hoping that it translate into change. So there's a need for consideration of how we might translate work in bioethics into direct practice, most specifically guiding research to consider the societal implications and societal implications over time. So you'll see that light blue wave threaded through. This is kind of the representation that bioethics has throughout the whole translational pipeline. Currently, you see it takes place any point along the pipeline, moving through from theoretical to practical, depending on its emphasis on influencing practice. So in orange, the translational bioethics, it takes the fruits of bioethics research, develops relevant mechanisms for translating that research into practice. And then that's where you'll see the implementation. So the main motivation here that Frith had talked about was the translational bioethics is a practical influence to create change in the real world. The translational bioethic aims to bridge this translational gap that exists between bioethics research and the implementation of this research in practice. So overall, translational bioethics is concerned with developing the practical interventions, changes in our practice and policies, and assessing them to see if they should be adopted by healthcare providers and or policymakers. And we need that in the translational continuum. Translational bioethics, it actually integrates bioethics into the disciplines that are concerned with designing, assessing, and implementing change in practice. It's at this stage that the co-production and public involvement initiatives, engagement with relevant stakeholders, feasibility and pilot studies would be actually undertaken. Okay, next slide, please. So here you'll see the point about the practical influence and accountability for the conclusions. So when Dr. Rothstein mentioned, he talked about public acceptability, which is critical. But from a provider's perspective, they think about the acceptability, but also accountability, right? We need to be accountable for what we're doing. So that's the reason we need to think above and beyond here and now and take societal implications into consideration. So integrating translational bioethics early on, it can provide the unforeseen societal benefits and harms to individuals and populations. And it can introduce a responsible research innovative framework that would focus on our societal dimensions of anticipation, reflexivity, inclusion, and responsiveness. Next slide, please. So given that we have all of these technological advances that Dr. Rothstein mentioned, even the personalized medicine, the data science, the AI, nanotechnology, all of these fields within biomedical research, there's still embedded expectation that translational research will provide particular social benefits. It's implied. Given the challenges in translating findings into our interventions that can reach patients and populations, these practical applications of these impressive achievements and their consequent impact on health outcomes are often overwhelming, like Dr. Rothstein mentioned regarding the COVID. The next slide, please. So with regards to COVID, we had this huge, influx of COVID. We seen the impact of it. Then we also noticed the mortality, and it was in our disparate population, sadly. So yes, there were social determinants of health, but in addition to the poor uptake of the COVID-19 vaccines, there were also these health disparities that no one really predicted would be exposed. And they were exposed by greater mortality rates from the COVID-19 among racial ethnic minorities, thereby supporting the need for translational bioethics, given the public health impact and the lack of societal efforts that were taken. And yeah, we do know that it happened quickly, but it shouldn't have happened within that bubble or that vacuum. So keeping in mind that the ultimate goals of translational science, they are related to improved health outcomes and decreasing health disparities. So here there was an opposite societal impact. Next slide, please. So here, just again, it occurred in the disadvantaged communities that were more vulnerable to the pandemic. And yes, there were several different, there are several factors that were involved. And ultimately, to stave off future unnecessary loss of life, that COVID-19 crisis should be seen as an opportunity for us to consider these societal impacts and translational bioethics to fully address disparities and underlying structural factors in society that could be contributing to these poor health outcomes. Next slide, please. Next. Yep. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for this great talk where you actually discussed the bioethics pipeline, and you even went to the extent of proposing a place for translational bioethics. And you even further extended the case study that was initiated by Professor Rothstein, focusing on the issue of COVID-19. And so what we're actually trying to say is, what can we learn from what happened with COVID-19 in terms of thinking about some of these societal impacts? So thank you once again. So to the participants, please feel free to submit your questions and comments using the Q&A function embedded in Zoom. And let me also take this opportunity to welcome my co-moderator, Professor Melissa Goldstein. Welcome. Okay, so now we are getting into the question and answer segment, and I'm going to pose some questions to our panelists. I'm also hoping that some of you are going to raise some additional questions that we can pose to our panelists as we engage on this very, very interesting topic. So, Mark, you clearly mentioned issues related to the challenges that relate to the IRBs right now in terms of focusing on societal implications. So in your view, what should actually be the best funding source for translational bioethics?
Well, the easy answer would be to have NCATS fund a bioethics component for translational bioethics at all 60 locations. I think that that would be an ideal result. If that doesn't happen, or perhaps until that happens, I think each institution ought to commit resources to support the position of someone who is like a coordinator of this. My conception of doing translational bioethics at such a sort of transformative research level is that the person is like the team captain, understands the problem, works with the researchers, and then recruits the necessary expertise. I don't have the expertise to evaluate all these conceivable problems that might arise or challenges. We would need, in some cases, people who were, anthropology-based or sociology experts or psychology or health economists, and nobody has all that expertise. What we can do, if we are in such a position, is to try to appreciate what the needs are and then get the expertise that's necessary. And I think in this regard, what I would hope would come about maybe informally without NIH involvement necessarily, is that the 60 NCATS funded centers would get together and have a sort of a pooled talent, because we might have, for example, my background is in law, even though I do bioethics all the time. Many of the other centers may not have someone with a legal background, and I could help them, but they might have a background, for example, in religious studies, and we might try to figure out on some project we're working on how it's going to be received or viewed by various religious faiths in the country. So I think the 60 centers really need to work together on solving these problems. Many of us will have the same issues to consider. So that is basically it. Federal funding would be great. In the absence of that, then I think maybe private grant funding, or certainly working together to pool resources to confront these common questions.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Dr. Nasser.
Yeah, if I could add to that, for the greater impact, I mean, if it can't go to the federal level, private, meaning pharma, big pharma industry, the organizations. I mean, there are so many medical organizations, healthcare organizations. There's American Heart Associations, there's various associations, medical associations that can incorporate translational bioethics in the beginning, right? In the early stages of developing a protocol or a grant. Industry is major. We sit down with multiple stakeholders when we're writing grants, right? I mean, we need to have that translational bioethics specialization. And if it means a team of anthropologists, the impact would be greater, right? You're going to have a greater public health impact because you're going to have that knowledge that not all these providers might have, or the pharmacists might have, or the bench scientists may have. We need to pool it together. That way we have a greater impact in society.
Thank you very much. So this actually drives me to the next question, which is about the structure that would best serve translational bioethics. So right now, we have the Institutional Review Board, or the Research Ethics Committees, that are mainly focusing on the rights, safety, and well-being of the individual research participants. And now we are looking at another issue, which is focusing on societal impacts. So in your view, what kind of structure would best serve translational bioethics? You also need to think about ensuring that you are not simply merely adding to the bureaucracy that we already have when it comes to research.
Well, it's a very interesting question. We are probably going to figure out the best way as we go along. We haven't done this research yet, and we're going to have to adjust on the fly, given the amazing research that's coming down the road. And I'm not sure what the best structure would be. I can tell you that in terms of the way IRBs have their jurisdiction, the United States is an international outlier. All the other countries that I've studied do not restrict RECs, or whatever their term is in their particular country, to the same narrow focus that we have in the United States, and there are historical and practical reasons for that. So nobody seems to have the right answer to how we do this. We, in the United States, addressed some of these big problems like cloning humans, enhancing humans, and so forth, through the use of bioethics commissions, which we had in place for many years, but we haven't had one in operation since 2017, and there's no assurance that we will get any more of the presidential bioethics commissions or congressionally chartered bioethics commissions. And that's one of the reasons why I think that integrating it in with folks who are doing all this amazing cutting edge research is a logical place to go. And I can't tell you today whether that would necessarily be the best. I'm just advocating that we need to think about this and get moving to address all these issues. And if we don't do it, we will be overwhelmed by it, and we will be playing sort of policy ethics catch up for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Samar, any thoughts?
I mean, that's kind of where it stands, unfortunately, but I don't want to just stop it there. I'm thinking as like Dr. Rothstein, he's an expert in the field. He can do more publications, kind of get into the journals that would get more exposure, the medical journals, speak to more of the providers, maybe even going to the local or the central IRB, whatever it is in his area, and speaking to them and showing them the impact and where it lies. I mean, that translational pipeline that was presented by Frith, it's kind of the exact same align as NCAT, and you could show it and see how aligned it is and the continuum, how it threads through. We already have bioethics. We have people that sit on our bioethics committee, you know, on our committees. So, I mean, that way you can get that translational continuum, the translational bioethics part. So also, I don't know if you could lobby to the other medical societies, the different associations out there, and talk to them, and they actually give fellowships and grants to those who are doing medical research or basic science research. That would be another option.
Thank you. I'm going to read a question from one member of the audience, which says, is there any suggested practical approach in assessing or reviewing potential societal impacts of translational research, which can be used by researchers and the IRB or the regulators?
So I don't sit on the board for the IRB. I don't know if there are, but I do know that like what that statement that Dr. Rothstein provided, that limited IRB statement, it is limited. So I don't know if they have a checklist that they review or if they even address it, or do they just put that aside? I'm not sure. And I think I would defer that to Dr. Rothstein with his expertise.
Well, I think IRBs, the way they're constructed in the United States, actually are not the best places to address these issues. I am a former IRB chair, and we were just happy if we could move paper from Part A to Part B and do a good job on the protocols that we got. We didn't have the time, the budget, the expertise to think about, okay, if we start having all these, you know, neural implants in 3 generations, are we going to be the Borg? I just, that's beyond the ability of an IRB, and I think we would be making a mistake to try to put that also on IRBs. We need another mechanism to address that, and that's why I've suggested an enhanced role for the CTSAs initially, but I think all researchers that are doing this sort of cutting edge research ought to be equipped and in networks that can work on these problems.
Thank you. And there is an interesting point that has been raised by someone who says, can the panelists please respond to the international context and those institutions that do not have a CTSA? So if you were to try and think broadly about the international context, what would be your views? Let's hear from Samar first, and then we can move to Mark.
So I'm very limited in the international field. I do know that international research is more cutting edge than we've seen in the United States. I'm not familiar with how they incorporate bioethics, but that's a really good thought. Maybe Dr. Rothstein knows more.
Well, I just completed a study of translational bioethics in 22 diverse countries around the world, and I hope that will be published soon. So I can't give you too much detail about that, but it's an issue that not only is important in the United States, but it's important elsewhere. And one of the suggestions that I've made, this idea of embedding bioethics people with researchers, was very well received internationally. And I hope in a few months, maybe with some good luck, it will be published, and I'd be happy to come back and discuss that.
Thank you very much. Melissa, do you have any comment or question?
Thanks so much to you both for coming today. This is very exciting for me as a bioethics lawyer, policy person. I actually have two questions. One was in the Q&A, actually, by Kyle Ferguson, who said, I think that bioethics has a tendency to fetishize policy. The translation pipeline model seems to imply that philosophical theoretical work is valuable only insofar as it might contribute to policy and practice downstream. And I'm interested in what both of you think about that. As a person who has done both bioethics and policy, I always think policy is important, but maybe I'm missing the mark there.
So I can give my perspective from the translational research. So I've done work at the bedside, I've done work at the bench side. And so a lot of what we do at bench work may not translate right to the population, right? It might not go directly to public health. We might get a publication out of it. We might get something that might stimulate somebody down the road to take it a step further. Let's say we're checking a blood test on somebody and it was elevated, this biomarker in certain patients. It might not go to the patient, right? Because it might still need that bioethical standpoint, the social impact, societal benefit. So it might just become a publication, which is great, right? It could be something that's embedded in a talk. It could be a poster presentation. It's still disseminated. It doesn't mean it just stays, right? So there's that continuum because we need those. We need those researchers who do that bench work. We need the researchers who do the bedside because then it takes it to another level, which is community and then population health and then policy dissemination and implementation and all that. But there's reasons they have those steps and it's kind of the exact same thing. Even though it's not exact replica of bench to bedside, it's kind of the same thought process. So they're doing publications on theoretical research. That's what I took it as. That's where I aligned it from bench to bedside. Now, Dr. Rothstein might have another view, but that was from a translational researcher point of view. I hope that helps.
Dr. Nasser, I agree with that, but I just would like to add something. Much of my work over the years has focused on the endpoints, changing policies, changing laws, changing the way things are done in research and in other contexts. But I don't believe it's a straight line from doing research about bioethical issues and outcomes. It's a wavy line, and it may not be direct. And I think one of the things that we need to consider all the time is what's the public view on this? We are not all-knowing. We have opinions. We think they may be informed opinions, but we need to figure out what the public is concerned about, what they need to know, how are they going to make their decisions. The public, after all, is going to make the decision about whether xenotransplantation is a good idea or a bad idea, or how we want to limit it if in some way. And so what we do in the realm of bioethics research and translational bioethics research is informing as many people as possible, stimulating debate, raising issues, trying to figure out where we're going to get the answers from. And as I tell my students all the time, I don't know the answers. On a good day, I know the questions, and that's what bioethics is all about.
And one more note on that, if I can add, you had mentioned the patient, right? So the public. So the patient-centered research is something that's huge right now. So one thing that I've done in my research is I'm working on a grant through PCORI, patient-centered oriented research. So we actually brought on patients into our stakeholders, our meetings, so that we can get their perspective, that direct perspective. Would this work for you? Is this something that you would implement in your own lifestyle? So we brought that patient voice to the table. And that's something that a lot of these other maybe bigger corporations might not do, or bigger grants, but that's something that we are embedded, and we're writing a grant for it right now so that they have their own voice and they could see, will this really be implemented? Is it feasible? Is this something that will be, this will have uptake in our population at this point of time? So that's just another way to bring their voice in.
That was very, very helpful from both of you. Thank you. I do want to point out that Dr. Rothstein has been one of my mentors over the years, and I'm very appreciative. So I've heard him tell me that on a good day, he knows the question. So I've heard that throughout the years. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we're getting to the end of our webinar, and I'm going to ask our two panelists to give their parting shots, 30 seconds for each, starting with Mark.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. It's great to be on with my dear friend Melissa, and I think it was a very interesting discussion, and I hope that in other places and in other ways, this same kind of discussion and debate takes place, and that we can think more broadly about what it is that bioethics should do, and especially bioethics in coordination with these amazing scientific research projects.
Thank you. And Samar?
Thank you. And thank you everyone for hosting and inviting me to this great presentation. And thank you, Dr. Rothstein. I learned quite a bit from you too, even reviewing your background and your research. And it's impressive. And so to me, I do believe translational bioethics should be at the core of everything we do. We should be thinking about the societal impact when we are writing our research, developing research grants in the translational continuum. CTSI should have it embedded. And we also have to think about what is the main purpose is to improve our patient outcomes. So they're centered, they're straight center. So we really should go to them as a stakeholder and give them that voice and see if it really would work, whatever ideas that we are coming up with. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our two panelists. And let me just add that I've actually observed that some of the major funders, particularly in Europe, now require that for some of the big grants, the applicants actually include a section in which they discuss the societal implications. So I think bit by bit, we're actually moving in the right direction, where investigators are actually thinking about these issues ahead of time, so that some of these issues could actually be addressed through those same grants. So here I'm thinking of even the H3 Africa, right, which is a big initiative funded by NIH, also has some component that includes empirical research that is also focusing on these ethical issues. So thank you very much. There was a question related to the recording of this webinar. So yes, it's going to be available. We are going to share it with all those who have attended. And for our GW students who need professional enhancement credits, please complete those forms and submit them through our bioethics interests group email address. And I just want to go through a few announcements regarding upcoming events. So our next event is going to be, next slide. Yes, it's going to be focusing on the inclusion of pregnant women in clinical trials. So we have our colleague, Dr. Emily Smith, who is going to share views on her work that involves pregnant women. And this is going to be on the 2nd of April. Next slide. And we're also going to have another webinar just like this one on the 17th of April, which is focusing on the ethics of artificial intelligence. Next slide. We just want to remind everyone about the Research Day 2024, and we're still receiving abstracts. Next slide. And of course, our Summer Institute is coming from June the 3rd up to the 14th, and it's going to include a course on responsible conduct of research and another course on ethics in public health. and also another one on commercial determinants of health, and several other courses. I think we're offering 10 courses this year that are worth 1 credit each. Thank you. So these were all the announcements that I had. So I'd like to end up by thanking our two panelists. Thank you for taking time to share your views on this very, very interesting topic. I would also like to thank everyone who participated in this webinar. I could see we had people coming from various continents, various institutions. And once again, my apologies for the technical hiccups that we faced during this webinar. We're going to look into the causes and try and address them so that in future webinars, we won't experience this. So once again, thanks everyone and goodbye.
Thank you.